Welcome to the Civic Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Sylvie Legere. Today, we are talking about public art. You know, around the country, there's discussions are taking place to remove statues from the public place. So the focus of the podcast today is to unpack public art. What is its purpose? How is the community engaged in public art projects? How are public-private partnerships that are necessary to turn an idea into a vision and then a reality happen? And how do we ensure that public art will be there for the enjoyment of all through the test of times? So my guest today is Cynthia Noble. She is the executive director of Art on the Mart in Chicago. Art on the Mart is the largest permanent digital art projection in the world, projecting contemporary artwork across 2.5 acres of river facade of the Mart. It's a huge building in Chicago. In September 2018, the Mart introduced Art on the Mart to the world with a launch event that attracted over 32,000 people to the Riverwalk in downtown Chicago, transforming its urban context. Cynthia, welcome and great to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, you know, when we think of the art, oftentimes we just think museum, right? But art is so much more. It's actually the creative economy contributes to like 6.1% of the GDP in the US. And the Policy Circle published a brief that's called The Creative Economy. And I invite everyone to review the brief and also to listen to the Civic Leader podcast on this topic. But art is much more than just what's in the museum. It's fashion, it's music, entertainment, it's performance. It really is what makes our neighborhoods and communities really vibrant. So I wanted to, Cynthia, to start with the basics and talk about what is public art and how should we think about its purpose in our communities?
Sure. So public art, simply put, is simply art in public spaces, art that's accessible to all, oftentimes outdoors, although not always. And it's often site specific. So that means that it's created in response to the place and the community. And you know, when we think of public art, sometimes it conjures an image of sculpture, static sculpture or monuments, but it's important to remember that public art can take a wide range of forms, sizes, and scales. So just to name a few, you know, public art can include murals, of course, sculpture and memorials, but also integrated architectural or landscape architectural work, community art, digital media like the Art on the Mart project, and even performances and festivals. And so public art can be permanent and very durational, or it can also be a temporary fleeting experience for the community. And in all its forms, public art adds enormous value to the cultural, aesthetic, and economic vitality of a community. And it's now a well-accepted principle of urban design that public art contributes a number of things. Contributes to a community's identity, it fosters pride, a sense of belonging, and absolutely enhances the quality of life for its residents and visitors.
Yeah, we really take it for granted, but I know like visitors and residents appreciate it, and becomes also landmarks for a neighborhood. So I know that there's a lot of even housing projects that now include public art because it brings so much, and it can also be used for just the enjoyment of the residents and everyone that visit it. So my question is like, how do these public art projects get initiated? And maybe you could share the Chicago experience, but also you know, maybe in other communities that you've witnessed. So
Sure.
yeah, tell us how does it start? Like, who gets the idea? Can I just come up with an idea and then just go, you know, to my city council? I guess I could, right?
Absolutely. You know, traditionally, it's public art has emerged from government initiatives. That's often been, you know, coming out of a city's art commission or art council. You know, in Chicago, that's like the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. And they might issue a call to artists, you know, through a RFP process, that kind of thing. And yet nowadays, we're seeing that public art is increasingly being initiated by individuals and private entities, corporations, and others. And so it's really a wonderful mix of people who are willing and able to take the lead on such projects. And I think that's really important because what results is more of a diversity of artworks in the end, and ideally a greater volume, and in more sites. So when it doesn't, when public art is initiated by others beyond the government, there's oftentimes still a partnership with local government. For example, private developers who want to create, say, a public art related to a real estate building or asset, they might partner with the government to learn about different ordinances that might come into play, such as signage, or what are the codes around noise levels and so forth, if it's a piece that has an auditory component. So it's important to still be in close dialogue with local government, but certainly the ideas can come from anywhere. And sometimes people work with an art consultant or an advisor to navigate some of the complexity of ideating, implementing, installing, and caring for over the long term a public art project. And there are even some consultants and advisors that specialize in public art commissions.
That's interesting. Does it get initiated around, I imagine, around a specific event, or there's a celebration of a century or a commemoration of a personality that represents the city or the community, in addition to new development project? Do you see, like, are there like, what's the trend, or what have you seen?
Yes, I think as we've seen, frankly, in the recent controversies around some public art and monuments, people place a great stake in what these images, these objects or events symbolize. And so I think there's a lot of thought being given to their power. And so it's public art is created for the reasons you described and so many more, whether it's marking the life of an important figure in culture, whether that's important to a specific community or communities, to mark an anniversary or milestone event, certainly, but it also could be a response simply to current conditions of culture and an expression of the feeling of what it's like to be part of a community at this time. So public art can really be a catalyst for discussion around the most important and relevant issues of our time.
Yeah, interesting. So how does a project like Art on the Mart go from an idea to this reality? And even like, who had the idea, right? The building, this building is huge. It's a huge landmark in Chicago. It's a huge building. It's been there for a long time.
Yes.
For a really long time. I don't even know when. But
Yes.
But how did the idea come up of this visual work, and then walk us through the main phases of such a huge project?
Sure. Well,
how long did it take? How long did it take from ideal to 2018 launch?
Right. In this particular case, the Mart had a short history of doing other pop-up projections, even as far as the 1950s, with, of course, very different technology. But when it really gained momentum, it gained momentum in relationship to the lighting framework plan that the city of Chicago developed back in 2014. And as the Riverwalk was a new idea, and the plans were underway for this excellent new feature to the downtown landscape, the city began to wonder, how can we further amplify this Riverwalk and as an asset? And so there were a number of ideas about how to light the downtown area, particularly around the Riverwalk. And
this was the lighting, so it's a lighting framework.
Lighting framework plan.
So how do we light up the Riverwalk? So in Chicago, yes, there's this river that used to be toxic, and now it's completely developed, and there's a walking path, right? So as part of designing this walking path, there was this lighting framework plan that was put together in 2014. So interesting. Okay.
That's exactly right. And it was really intended to not only support the needs of residents to enjoy the local landscape, but also to boost tourism. It was absolutely tied to the marketing plan for the city of Chicago around tourism and economic development, business development in the city. And a number of important things emerged from that. One of those was a public art plan specifically that emerged in 2017, 18. It was resolved in 18. And so taking a look at the combination of those two plans, there was a lot of great data and rationale and consensus that had been built around wanting to do something quite grand around lighting. And so the former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, approached the parent company of the Mart, formerly known as the Merchandise Mart, Vornado Realty Trust, which is a REIT in New York, owns the Mart essentially, and asked them whether we would like to be the pioneers to do the first video mapping project, which is what this project is. Video mapping is when you take these projectors, and there are 34 of them, and create essentially a moving image display, almost like a movie screen, although different in its own way, onto this, again, very large facade. And just to give you a sense of scale, the 2.5 acres, Sylvia, that you mentioned, that's larger than 2 American football fields. So it's quite extensive and very impactful in the city. And so Vornado, decided to make this incredible philanthropic commitment. And what's astounding about it is it's a 30-year agreement with the city. So quasi-permanent, really, as far as, a public and private partnership. And so we identified the site for the installation, where the projectors would be ultimately installed, did all kinds of feasibility studies together with some local architecture firms. And finally, after learning so much from all of those studies, in late February of 2018, this agreement, which allowed for essentially a land lease for those projectors to be installed on city property on the Riverwalk. The agreement was passed for that to happen, and that meant that we could install the projectors as soon as we were ready, begin projecting. And the agreement itself is quite interesting as a public partnership agreement, because it also has embedded in it this idea that there will never be logos, branding, or messaging. And so that really underscores the very wonderful and specific commitment that Vornado made, because it's not about advertising or turning the Mart into just one giant billboard. And that was a major concern expressed by the public and in some of the local media at the time, as it was under consideration for passage, and the agreement under consideration for passage in the city council. People were concerned that this River North area, the neighborhood where the Mart is in downtown Chicago, could turn into another kind of Times Square, in the negative sense of Times Square, and how people perceive it as sometimes over commercialized. So it was a very unique agreement, again, in terms of its duration, the ability to do this at all, and what it would be, this commitment to the public and to accessibility. So
a 30-year.
30 years.
It's a long commitment. Like, it's surprising it would be. Was there a rationale for 30 years, or instead of just saying, well, let's start with 5?
Right.
Well,
the idea
or
is that
10 years, maybe.
It was a big dream, and so the duration matched that. And I think the intent was always that this would become a permanent feature of the city, and that it would endure beyond particular administrations. That it's something fixed and that
continues.
Right.
So was a separate organization formed? Was it is it still under Vornado? Or is there a separate entity that manages this project that is a nonprofit or a for-profit organization, or I don't know what kind of entity? Is it a different entity that you're leading that's called Art on the Mart?
Today, it's still in the original partnership form, governed by Vornado and the city of Chicago. Okay. However, we are considering, an evolution toward becoming a nonprofit foundation as Art on the Mart, but that's not been finalized. Something we're thinking about. The original agreement, though, does provide other sort of dimensions to the governance. So, for example, we have a curatorial advisory board that's required by this agreement, and that includes some key art experts from the local communities. So we have a couple of curators from the major art institutions. We have representatives from the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events of the city, including the commissioner, Mark Kelly. We have the founder and president of Expo Chicago, which is the contemporary art fair that takes place annually on Navy Pier, and two very important artists. So it's representatives from the Mart as well. So we have a great mix of people that really shape and guide the curatorial vision of the platform. So that's been an important governance element so that we stay true to the public art mission. Similarly, in a parallel way, we have another committee that's the Civic Advisory Committee. And that's also a requirement embedded in the mission in terms of governance. So the Civic Advisory Committee is composed of public safety officials. So, the police, the head of the district that the Mart resides in, the fire chief, the Coast Guard, because of course we're on the river and there's boat traffic that we have to think about. So water safety as well. And fleets and facilities management, which is a separate department in Chicago that supervises and manages the Riverwalk itself, as well as representatives from the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. So it's quite comprehensive. So we're not only looking at just producing great art and offering great programming, but making sure we do it in a safe way for drivers, for pedestrians. And of course, public safety takes on a new dimension in terms of the pandemic. And so we've worked very closely to comply with city guidelines along those lines. One other part of governance is that we also work closely with the alderman's office and with the mayor's office. So many city entities are involved, and it's very collaborative that way. Truly a partnership.
It seems like this is it's a really great model where you have the curational committee, and then you have really the civic committee of just the safety and the events around it, so that you ensure that actually this is not just something that happens in a vacuum. The art is changing, but it's really part of a bigger plan of events and everything else. And I assume that also in terms of the financial, the financial burden of this project that is ongoing. I mean, I think that's what's unique about this project is it's projecting different art, right? Do you change every year? It's once a year, or you change it? I remember when there was a big sign for the graduates congratulating the 2020 seniors who did not have a graduation. And there was a very special display for them there. So you kind of you change it with the times, and then also you're on a schedule for the different projections. Is that how it
right? So we rotate works approximately seasonally, just like a museum or a gallery might. So we're open 9 months a year. So we have a spring, summer, and fall season. And so roughly, a collection of a program of projections, say 3 to 4 at a time, that total about 30 minutes at a time, which we repeat twice a night. Are all, they alternate, they rotate in every season, approximately. And we're open every night, 7 nights a week, with the 2 showings. The times of the showings change because of when sunset changes. Of course, it has to be dark out to see this. So
yeah, that's right. It's quite late, right? The showings are like at 9 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, or it ends at 9:30, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and in terms of the financials, so there's a lot that's involved in a project of such a grandeur. And what is the financial division, or like who bears the cost of such a production?
Right. So the Mart made the initial capital commitment, which was 8 million plus. So to do the feasibility studies, install the projectors, all of the initial work. With the wonderful exception of initial set of grants from the Terra Foundation for American Art, the Mart and Vornado have funded the entire project with, I want to qualify, so all of operations and maintenance and content commissions with another qualification that we have received some in-kind content. So with some partners we've worked with have provided content that they developed through their own fundraising, through their own funding. And so, as we consider becoming a foundation, I think we'll evolve toward more models where the Mart will continue to, on an ongoing basis over the 30 years, commit to operations and maintenance. And we're going to continue to more and more invite the community and other stakeholders into producing content with us, which I think is actually not only reduces the burden for the Mart, but I think is an important gesture to invite people in a significant way, in a meaningful way, so that people have some ownership over what we see as this incredible opportunity of the largest blank canvas in the world to project things that are important to the people here.
Oh yeah. And then the city, does the Art Council of the city also contribute financially to this partnership?
This does not this does not at all depend on any taxpayer money, which is an incredible, thing to note, because it again underscores the philanthropy of this gift. Yes.
Yeah, of this gift from
Right.
To have this vision. I mean, it really is remarkable and a real model for companies who want to really make a mark in a neighborhood and impact the feeling and the community. So, what are the key success factors you think for the long term? And if we think beyond the Mart, what strikes me, what's interesting about the art on the Mart is that this is ongoing. So there is in place, as you described, different councils that are permanent. And it seems like it's critical to a public art project to have this ongoing, because it's there generally for a long time. You need to have a structure in place of programming around public art so it stays relevant and alive. Like, talk a little bit about that. What you think are the key success factors to a public art initiative?
Yes, I think it's so important to think from the very beginning about a long-term vision, because you do want to activate the space around it, whether it's through more simple things like landscaping, but also perhaps programming like on-site music or dance or performing arts that in our case might interface thematically with a projection that we might show. And so how can we, like any project, how can we continue to build an ecosystem around what we're doing? And it's a way to continue to invite the community in. So maybe you're not in the business, so to speak, or you don't have the skill set to produce a projection, although we could envision offering some training down the road in that regard as well in communities. But you might be part of a choir, or you might propose that your roving theater troupe comes to the Riverwalk and works with us and works with our partners at the city to activate the space. Because after all, all public art, whatever form it takes, it's about placemaking and about activating and making alive the spaces that we inhabit, that we move through, that maybe we take for granted, but become opportunities to come together, to convene. And we found through this pandemic how important convening is and how much we all miss it. And so public art can really be thought of as that, as a not only as a catalyzer of dialogue around the relevant issues of our time, but a place to convene, to come together, and to find common ground around art and culture.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, and also I think you mentioned that you have to think of public art as a project, right? So there needs to be all of the regular, the financial, the legal, the security, the insurance, the maintenance of it needs to be thought of, right? And then what you just talked about, kind of the marketing, you talked about the audience development, the engagement of the local community, and I love how you say this is the catalyst for activation, and that's how it needs to be thought of. And a lot of times when you go to cities, you see statues, you see monument that's just there without really understanding why, and there's rarely events around it. And I think like if there were, then I think we would understand a lot better why at a point in time, this place and this statue or this art was put there. So I love this way of thinking about a catalyst for activation and placemaking. So,
Yes, and to your point about all the project management aspects, that's absolutely true. I think especially with art, we tend to want to glamorize it. And it's all, and no matter whether it's art or some other idea, it's so fun to be part of the ideating stage of things, right? And it's important to carry that passion that we have in the beginning of a project throughout its hopefully very long duration, and to care for it over the long term. To your point, with attention to financial, legal, security, even things like insurance liability and all of those things, marketing. And so, there's definitely a project management aspect for sure to this work. And so when, if you're initiating or if you're interested in initiating a public art project, it's worth thinking about it as any organization has. If you were to be starting a nonprofit or a small business, it requires so many of the same dimensions.
Yeah, it's not one and done. I think like through this conversation and thinking about public art, and I think as citizens and leaders in our communities, we can't think of it's a one and done.
Right.
My father wanted to build a jardin de la langue française, a garden of French language, where there would be representation of each letter of the alphabet. It was like this grand project, and it never really took up because it's not just a one thing. It's like you almost have to think as public art as a small business or a business that will survive you, and what will that look like, and how will it remain relevant and active and an active part of a community. So thanks for this discussion and sharing this, because it brings a new paradigm to think about public art. And I think it's a project like Art on the Mart that really push us to think differently about art. And what's amazing about, I think, Art on the Mart is also serving as a model. You were telling me serving as a model for other cities. Is around the world, or is it in the United States?
Yes, well, there have been other, projection projects throughout the world, but they tend to have been more pop-up things, either related to a lighting festival, or to your point earlier, Sylvie, maybe in connection with an anniversary of something. But this is the first, permanent and large-scale digital projection in the world. And so we've been fielding, a lot of inquiries about, and we're very flattered, how can this work in the city, X city, Y, and some of those are in North America, but some are other places. So I think, we welcome that. We don't see it as a competitive environment, but instead, the more the better. The more an ecosystem around public art is created, the better for all. And so we're delighted that something has popped up in Denver subsequently. I've heard a little buzz. I'm not even sure what's going on in Seattle. So I think there's some other people thinking about projection projects, but of course, public art is much broader than projection projects. So I hope this, what I'm offering as a model is really received in the broadest possible sense. That as you look around your community, what places need to come alive. What are the issues that are resonant for you and your neighbors and your friends, and how can you together think about making it better?
Yeah. So what would be, in closing, thank you so much for this discussion. And I'd love for you to kind of tell us, if someone came to you with an idea of a public art project, what would you tell them to start looking at, and what would you tell them to be very careful about? Like, what are like some of the pitfalls that can happen, and what would be like the first thing that people need to do?
Right. I think it's important from the very beginning to define the purpose or even the mission as quickly as possible of the project. Why are you doing this? To know that is really important, because one of the earliest and most important and ongoing tasks is to socialize it and to build consensus around it. Because no matter what project it is, no matter where it is, there's going to be a natural dynamic tension between stakeholders. And that's a good thing, because that means people are paying attention, people care. And so being clear about your mission and being able to build consensus and momentum around that mission, I think is essential. And in a parallel set of questions is to, or considerations is to be informed about what the contemporary controversies and provocations have been around public art. What is that discourse? What is that dialogue? It's not hard to discover through a quick Google search, when people are discussing monuments or other projects that have come into question. So, it's important to make sure that the public art is of our time and that it makes sense for now and for who we all are now. And that, I think, again, I think it bears repeating that it's important to have the long view in mind from the beginning, that this is, it's not a one and done thing, that even if you're the idea generator and then need to step away, it's important to, before you do, to build that community of people around it that are going to see it through. And to even think about, what funding will look like, not only in the short term, but over how it will evolve. And to plan for contingency. As we've found, that's the biggest lesson, I think, for all of us around anything in this last year, is that, we need to be agile and have contingency sort of baked into our strategic plans. So I guess the short answer is to have a plan, to think of it as a project that needs management and some strategy behind it.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is to really define, the stakeholders, like you listed, the different council, the curational council, and then the civic council around safety and the U.S. Coast Guard. Like just to really put pen to paper and make a list of who are all of the stakeholders that need to be involved. And when people are involved in the very beginning, then they have more buy-in, they'll participate in finding solutions and also plan for representation, right, of the either local government, but also the neighborhood, the people in the neighborhood, to ensure that they're aware, like directly in the neighborhood, right? They're aware of what's going on and they're part of it, right?
That's absolutely right. A lot of my job is simply communicating what's going on. I offer a lot of updates to different groups, different people that just need to know maybe a little bit in advance before it actually happens. And it seems like maybe just a courtesy, but it's more than a courtesy. It's really inviting that deeper long-term participation of all of the stakeholders. So that communication is really, really important.
Really important. And so have a way to communicate. Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for being on the Civic Leader podcast. You are truly a civic leader with this initiative and sharing your wisdom and experience. I think this is really, there's some very important lessons learned here that will benefit anyone who is considering getting engaged in their communities to launch a public art project. So thank you so much. It's really great to have you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Civic Leader podcast and that you are inspired to engage in the arts in your community. Perhaps you could join or start an art council or simply discuss the possibilities with your city representatives. So thank you for listening to the Civic Leader podcast. I invite you to subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. Thank you.